This is without question either the biggest or one of the biggest traps inside of Pokemon Unite. One of the biggest baits in the game. Something that a lot of players throw themselves into, and it is the reason you are losing matches. I'm talking about taking the fight at either the top Regieleki or one of the bottom Regis right around 2 minutes 30 seconds, 2 minutes 15 seconds, just before Rayquaza spawns. And it's actually a bigger bait than you think, probably for a reason that you don't actually expect. In this video, I'm going to break down why this fight is a bait, what you can do to protect yourself and your team, and what you can do if you find yourself in this fight even though you actually don't really want to be there. First, let's talk about the two objectives. We have Regieleki in the top path, and we have one of the three bottom Regis in the bottom path: Ice, Steel, or Rock. First, let's start talking about Regieleki. Regieleki at around the 2 minute 30 second mark is actually the most valuable Regieleki that you will have inside the game, but that doesn't mean that it provides insane value for your team. If your opponents happen to not have a tier 2 goal, something that your team has already broken, I think this Regieleki's value skyrockets. Its stonks are way up at this point, and it's actually a pretty good situation to fight around because it does offer your team essentially a Zapdos inside the enemy goal zone if it walks in. I often like to think about win conditions inside of a match of Pokemon Unite. What sets your team up for a possible win? What sets your team up for a possible loss? What sets the opponent up for a win? Etc. So when you're looking at this final Regieleki, you actually give yourself a win condition if they have no tier 2 goal. Now, that is a pretty rare situation. In most all situations, a team has a tier 2 goal up in the top path, even sometimes a tier 1 if you haven't been able to do any damage, and then that fight is absolutely horrible. But if they have a tier 2 goal up, or you have a tier 2 goal up, I think this Regieleki is almost worthless in the grand scheme of things. The reason I say this is because even if you get it or the enemy gets it and it walks all the way towards your base into your top goal, the best that could happen is someone scores 100 points in there, essentially. I guess you could figure out a way for someone to score 65 and then you score 100, but you get what I'm saying. The best that could happen is you score some points and then you still have this massive objective in the center of the map that is going to be the big fight. Given that there's really only one situation that you really want to heavily focus that Regieleki, I think in general this is just not a good objective at all at this point in the match, because a much more important objective is spawning in just a few moments, and that's Rayquaza. Often matches are decided by what team can secure and win a fight around Rayquaza. Now let's talk about our bottom Regis: Regice, Registeel, and Regirock. All three of these provide decent bonuses to your team, but they are not game-changing bonuses that you cannot win without. Registeel giving you some extra damage, Regirock increasing your defenses, and Regice giving you increased health regeneration. These are all good buffs that you would like to obtain if you can, but there's no point in losing a match and making sure you got a Regice buff. Hey, congrats guys, we lost by 600 points, but at least we had that sweet health regen. Given that these bonuses aren't big enough to win the game on their own, you are often giving up too many Pokemon in this bottom fight to make sure that you secure an objective that you may or may not need. Not to mention the fact, if the enemy's there and they happen to secure it and you've lost a couple Pokemon, now you're so far behind that you're almost certainly losing the Rayquaza fight. And this is one of the big issues that happens here, is the team that is more coordinated, has better positional advantage, often wins this fight down at the bottom Regi. A big problem, especially for a solo player, is that you cannot tell your team that this has essentially become the Rayquaza fight. And that's one of the biggest issues with either of these top or bottom path fights, is it essentially becomes the Rayquaza fight. And if your team is not aware of that and they get KO'd in this moment, you've almost certainly thrown the game away. When you are this close to Rayquaza, you are setting yourself up to not have Pokemon available to fight at it and give your opponents a free opening to rip it and take it off the map. Now, before I talk to you a little bit about why this is actually such a bad fight in a way that you might not have considered, let me just say this. Oftentimes, if a team is down there with all 5 of its members, this is a great time to take this objective really quick and then head to the center. The big problem is you are often split up inside of a match of Pokemon Unite because people think the title of this game is Pokemon Do Not Unite, run around the map, do whatever you want. If you're all down there, ready to rip, and you have plenty of time to do it, I say absolutely go for it. This is a good time to take top or bottom objective. Otherwise, you are much better off getting your team positioning around the Rayquaza pit. Now here is something that I'm sure you know, but you may not have considered how detrimental it is, and this is why this fight is so incredibly bad. It is your KO timers. I'm sure you've noticed that the further into a match of Pokemon Unite you are, the longer your KO timer is once you get KO'd. And there are a lot of factors that actually go into this, and I'll explain them right now. Credit to the Unite math cord for figuring this out. Essentially, your KO timer is built up of a few things. First of all, your player level, the amount of time remaining inside of a match, the amount of KOs you have dealt out since the last time you were KO'd, and the amount of points you have scored since the time you were last KO'd. Taking a look at this chart here, you can see the level 13 Pokemon, which many carries are by the end of the game, will have a 17-second KO timer right around the 2-minute 30-second mark, and that's if they get KO'd right at 2 minutes 30 seconds. Not to mention, they will have extra seconds tacked on for the amount of KOs they have and the amount of points they've scored. Let's say they have an additional 5 KOs since the last time they were knocked out, and it could be a lot more, could be 10 KOs since the last time they were knocked out, and an additional 40 or so points that have been scored. Their timer increases dramatically. If they are a Cinderace with 10 KOs and 40 points, that's an additional 11 seconds on top of your 17-second timer, bringing it up to a number I can't even begin to compute, but I think it's somewhere near 28. Now again, that's if you get KO'd right at 2 minutes 30 seconds, you'll have a 28-second KO timer, meaning by the time you spawn and you get to your jump pad, Rayquaza will already be on the map and you will be late. Now let's talk about what's more likely to happen. What's more likely to happen is you get KO'd a lot closer to the 2-minute mark. You'll notice also here on this chart that if you get KO'd right under the 2-minute mark, you add an additional 4 seconds to your timer. Basically, if you take this fight and it doesn't go well, you are down for so long that the enemy can take Rayquaza from you. This is why this fight is so bad. Your timers are so long and the KOs that you give up are so much more valuable. If you give up a couple of Pokemon in this moment and they have a 20-second KO timer, you are going to be in the worst possible position for Rayquaza, all for a buff or a Regieleki that really won't change the outcome of the game. And this is something that I think you need to think about. What is the win condition for your team? The win condition is not that you get the Regirock buff. While that would be a good buff, the win condition is not that you have that buff. It is that you win the fight at Rayquaza. That is the win condition for, I would say, 90% of your Pokemon Unite matches. Especially when the top or bottom objective is coming down to the wire, the objective actually matters so much less than KOing members of the enemy team. Of course, you want to secure that objective. If you have a secure move like Psyshock or something like that on Espeon when you're fighting around this objective, great. But more importantly, if you KO 3 members of the enemy team, you have basically just won the game. And this is the biggest reason that fight is essentially bait. Unless this is an easy secure and you have great positioning around it and the enemy is really nowhere to be found, this is not an ideal fight. If you are taking this fight, I really think you should keep in mind how intense these KO timers are and how it will change the outcome of the match if you knock out opponents' Pokemon. I would not focus on the objective as much when you're up here. You need to focus on the fight, because this has essentially become the Rayquaza fight. Knowing all this, I think the smartest thing that you can do is either take the fight when you have an extreme advantage, avoid the fight altogether, or understand that when you are in that fight, the most important thing is probably KOing enemy Pokemon, because the timers they're about to get are so intense that you're going to put them in a position where they can't win the fight. Oftentimes what you're seeing near the end of the game when a team is controlling the match is they continue to KO enemies and put them on timers in such a way where you're essentially juggling the KOs of the opponent's team. You have 3 of them down, you don't take Rayquaza because you're already up, the next time one pops in you KO it, now you have another down, another pops in, and you sort of move through this flow of KOing enemies while at the same time not taking the objective unless you're very, very secure in taking it. You know, you have 4 enemies down. Even if one steals it, that's only 1 Pokemon that gets a Rayquaza shield. This is often how you control a Rayquaza fight, and it starts well before Rayquaza hits against the map if you happen to take one of these top or bottom fights. So I hope all that makes sense as to why these fights are often huge bait, especially if you only have a couple Pokemon walking towards it. You are essentially walking towards you losing the game. You are excitedly moving towards Regirock, and it's actually costing you the match. Also, it's just really interesting to think about your KO timers and how that affects things throughout the game, and how as you're moving towards the end of the game, you're probably a much higher level, you probably have a lot of KOs under your belt, and if you happen to give up a KO to the enemy team, it matters a lot more than you think as the match starts to tick down. So it's very, very important in this moment to be careful and make sure that you're not giving up a KO that actually matters so much. The long and the short of it, don't throw away your match for a buff or a Regieleki. It's not worth it. Near the end of the game, things are so much more valuable than getting one of these buffs. Again, safe, secure, go for it. If you're outnumbering the enemy at one of these fights, push it and start to win the game. But in general, I think these fights are a huge bait, and you'll see a lot of players throw away the entire match at 2 minutes 15 seconds when they could have just waited to throw away the match at Rayquaza. All right, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I love you all very much, and I will see you all next time.